So next up, we have Melissa Finucane. So Melissa was able to fly down here and join us today after doing lots of other traveling, but she's a senior behavioral and social scientist at RAND Corporation. She's also the director for Consortium Resilient Gulf Communities. Thank you, Missy. And thank you for the honor of participating in this virtual conference. It's tough to see with that. Right. I love hearing other people speak, not so much myself because I come from an academic perspective, but I know some of you are very interested in what the research says about why on earth do people do what they do in times of emergency. But my focus is also more on what can we do ahead of disasters and what can we do after disasters to help us communicate better across many different stakeholders about risk, especially when the information is uncertain. So I think that Ryan and Lemire did a great job giving the justification of the rationale for why this is important, so I don't have to go through it so much. Their real-world experience is exactly what we're talking about. This field of risk perception and risk communication research started about 40 years ago because of the real-world observation that there was often a disconnect between the technocrats, if you will, and the regulators, and even the scientists on one hand, and real-world people, fishers, people working in tourism, elected officials, local communities, talking past each other. You know, these folks, I put myself in this science category, collect data. They do it in a very robust way. They have a culture about how science is developed and how information that's useful can be generated and shared. And that's very different from how local people might develop their own understanding and expertise about their local environment. Often these folks will be saying they don't know what they're talking about because they don't know what's important. Their values are different from ours. So how do we bridge that gap and get these groups understanding what they both bring to the table and what's important information to share? So when we're talking about oil spill, mostly I focused on climate change over the last 10 to 15 years of my work. And I think it was Ryan and Lemire who were also talking about the differences in those experiences, where we're all very familiar, and actually I should say that I grew up in the northwest of Australia where we get a lot of cyclones. So that's a known risk, something that we know what to do ahead of time, how to prepare and be safe. I also spent 12 years in the Pacific Islands, so living in Hawaii, but traveling around, working around very low-lying islands and atoll areas. So they have developed many, many years or generations of knowledge about how you get ready and respond to those. Oil spills, not so much, but it's more than that, and I'll get into what the difference is between those two types of environmental risks. But in oil spills, at least before an oil spill, there's different priorities in communities. For the most part, they're economic and health priorities. How do we get an income to provide for our families, have shelter? How do we keep ourselves and our families safe so that we can function and have a way of life that we want, but we can also provide for a good, healthy future for our children and grandchildren? And so oil spills are not necessarily up there as something that people really want to deal with unless it's happening at the time. There's also no regulation and often a lack of funding for community engagement and community communication around these kinds of things. So that also doesn't make this a priority. There's a lack of trust in government, and I think this has increased over the years and the industry. It varies a lot depending on the issue you're talking about, but that doesn't help us set the scene for good communications. When we're actually in an oil spill, things are changing. The two previous speakers talked a lot about the uncertainty and confusing information, but it's partly because we don't know what's going to happen. It's impossible to say, oh, things are going to be fine, or this is what the impact is going to be, because it depends on the weather, it depends on ocean conditions. And these things are unpredictable. Scientists have a lot of great models, and especially over the last 10 years, the research has really improved about fate and transport and high atmospheric conditions and how it all interacts. But at the end of the day, it's all probabilistic. So we don't have 100% certainty, and it's hard to communicate about uncertainty, especially when emotions are high. It's a complex information landscape, not only because of the uncertainty, but the nature of information. There's physical science, there's biological and environmental factors to consider, there's human health, physical health, there's emotional health, there's stress, there's economic issues, and it all has to go into a hopper where now we also have social media and many sources of information that may seem more or less trustworthy and may be more or less trustworthy. This lack of cultural interoperability, often we think about that in terms of different agencies trying to talk to each other or different disciplines, but I also think that scientists and community people, we just have different norms and rules of ways that we talk about information, and it's hard to understand and trust each other when we haven't set the groundwork for that understanding. So there's this ubiquity of misinformation or misrepresentation of information, particularly with the rise of social media and access to information, but not necessarily a whole lot of media literacy that's going with that, so that people are not making informed judgments about the source of the information, or having some way of understanding how to determine whether the information they're receiving is in fact good information. So how do people make decisions under conditions of risk? Well, if you think about it, we literally make hundreds of decisions every day about risk and uncertainty. What medicines to take, what transport to take to work, whether we'll let our kids play at a stream that might be polluted, whether we should choose to live in a house that's near a chemical plant, or should we live out in a more rural area where perhaps there are less services available. But somehow we navigate all this uncertainty pretty successfully for the most part. But sometimes we do make spectacular mistakes. So the question is, why do we do what we do when we do it? How do we perceive risk? And how do we respond to those perceptions, which are really important because as people, whether you're a scientist, an expert in something, a lay person, at some point you have to step outside of your field of expertise and have to figure out what you're going to do. So just from a practical perspective, I think this is where the rationale is clearly laid out by Ryan and the mayor, that we need to understand different perspectives, in part because if we can articulate different views and values, that will help us facilitate the necessary debates and communications that have to happen before an oil spill, during an oil spill, and after an oil spill. And certainly kudos to Bill Murray and the National Academy's Grant Research Program for funding Sea Grant throughout this process of the last 10 years, but especially now to really interact with diverse stakeholders, which are all represented in this room, to really think through what are the list of projects and things that we still need, what are the processes, procedures, and relationships that we should be working on. So hopefully this will improve decision processes and outcomes, and I have this grand goal of reducing global conflict, but I think it's not that grand in that if we can have a better understanding of the different perspectives and values that are coming to the table and in this society figure out how to listen to and integrate those different parties and know that they can change depending on the situation, maybe there will be a little bit more trust and a little less conflict. I'm going to skip over this. Basically just says that when we make a decision, it depends on all the things that we bring to the table as a decision maker, but it also depends on the nature of the information we're getting and the context in which we're using that information. I should say that I'm a psychologist by training, so all these cognitive and social and emotional processes are really interesting to me, but it boils down to, I think that things are complex, but you can figure it out as we move along. The question is why. So this is a study that was done when the field was first established many years ago. They observed that, so I'll tell you the task list, people were told that motor vehicles kill 50,000 people a year in the US, and then people were asked to give an estimate of the mortality rate for each of about 40 other hazardous activities and technologies. And what they found was a systematic misestimation where people overestimated the risk of things like botulism or dying from a tornado or dying from a flood or pregnancy. Yet at the same time, people tended to misestimate in the sense that they underestimated the risk of dying from things like asthma or diabetes. And so over the years, we've come to understand that one of the reasons for this systematic misestimation is that things on the left there are very dramatic causes of death. We can get a vivid image in our head as to how someone might die from a tornado, and it's not pretty. Whereas we know actually a lot of people that might be walking around with diabetes and asthma. So it seems like it's more common or more familiar, and therefore seems less risky to people. A lot of research has basically come down to the understanding that perceptions of risk are determined or driven by two main factors, what we call bipolar. So the x-axis here the y-axis here is unknown risk, so that's the extent to which something is observable, familiar, well-known to people within your control. And the dread factor there is the extent to which something is unknown, unobservable, or might be a threat to future generations, has a risk of actually dying from it. Things that are involuntary also, and I forget who it was that mentioned that part of the equation. But if you take the example of, if I came to your house and woke up at 4 o'clock in the morning and said, get in the car, and I took you up a high mountain, and it's in the middle of winter, and I strapped sticks to your feet and push you downhill, you would say that is terribly risky. But if we said, let's go skiing in the winter in Appalachia, let's go have some fun this weekend, and you did it yourself, and you voluntarily got in that car, and you said, okay, I'll put these pieces of wood on my feet, and I will take myself down that hill. It would seem a lot more fun. Hopefully, you see the point of the story there is that when someone else is forcing you, so if there's an oil spill or even an act of nature that happens to you, it's seen as more risky than if you choose to do it yourself. When you add in the difference between a hurricane that is seen as more natural versus some technological disaster like an oil spill, where someone is seen to be in control or to blame for that problem or that event that happens, then we have very different reactions and perceptions of the risk, and so we have different responses about what should be done, what should have been done, and what should be done now in the future. How much time do I have? Because I know you're running late. Yeah, 10 minutes. Oh, okay. All right. So I'm just kind of skipping through a few different interesting findings in the hopes that some of this will be of interest to you. One of the very interesting findings that I spent a lot of my career working on is the fact that men typically judge the risk of different hazardous activities as lower than do women. There have been a lot of different theories or hypotheses suggested for this, but it's been hard to separate out differences by gender and by race because of co-varying factors such as trust in government, worldviews, and some other issues that I'll describe in just a moment. But here's the key finding so let me step back a second. One of the hypotheses that people proposed originally was that maybe gender differences occur because of some kind of irrationality or ineducability. So at the time, the theory was that, well, perhaps women are less rational or not as well educated about risk and risk assessment processes as men. So that's why they have a higher perception of risk. But we did this study with UK and Canadian toxicologists, all of whom are highly transferred PhDs in how do you assess risk, what is the risk analysis process. And we asked them to rate just on a 4-point scale from no risk to very risky, all these different items. And you can see what we call a tornado graph, that there is the difference between female versus male ratings of risk for pretty much all the items is to the right of the 0% mark. So given that all these people are highly educated about risk specifically, that kind of eroded that explanation. Then another explanation given was more based in a biological hypothesis, and that is, well, women are programmed to nurture and maintain life, which is birth. We're also physically more vulnerable to violence, such as rape or other violence. So perhaps it's something to do with just our genetics, our biology. But in a study where we oversampled minority groups, we were able to see that the line on the left is white males, white females, non-white males, and non-white females. And pretty much across almost all of the hazards we've asked people to rate again on that 4-point scale, white males tended to have lower risk perceptions on average than the other 3 groups, the white females, non-white males, and non-white females. And so this, again, eroded that biology explanation because you would expect gender differences to transcend racial differences. I'm sorry, you expect racial differences to gender differences to transcend racial differences. In that, you would expect the male-female difference to occur regardless of whether you're white or not, which is clearly not what we found here. Long story short, what we started exploring were differences in worldviews, differences in trust in government, regulatory agencies, and so on, and ways of making decisions that people thought were good or bad, or it should be pursued as, you know, in a democracy like ours. To start off with the worldviews, what we found was that it was actually wasn't about race and gender. It's just people with lower risk perceptions. In our society, that tends to be white males, but people with lower risk perceptions tend to agree with more hierarchical statements. So that, for instance, if you said risk should be imposed on individuals without their consent, if it's deemed in the interest of society, they would agree with that. They would disagree with egalitarian statements such as, you know, risks and benefits should be spread across the whole of society. They would also disagree with community-based decision making. At the end of the day, what we see is that there's a lot of variability in perceptions of race, but also in the socio-political values within race and gender groups. And what it comes down to is the extent to which you or a group that you belong to is more vulnerable, is less in control, and may perhaps benefit less. So if you're someone who is creating the risk, managing the risk, able to maintain or sustain some benefit from that risk, then you probably will see it as less risky than others who are not in those positions, more powerful or controlling positions. A good example is in Sweden. We never find that gender difference. The male and female risk perceptions are very similar across a whole bunch of items. And some suggest that it's because it's a much more egalitarian society here. And women are approximately half of the various decision-making bodies, elected and unelected. So I'll leave you with that, just as different ways that people like me, social psychologists and others, have looked at why do people think differently about risk. But what is the implication of that? At the end of the day, it might not matter why, it's just the fact that we come to these challenges and these uncertain situations with different understandings of how the world works, different ways that we want the world to work. How do we move ahead and make sure that the right information is getting to the right hands at the right time, and then decisions are being made in the right way? Well, firstly, of course, we just have to acknowledge that different worldviews matter. But we can go further. So an example is, if we look at people who tend towards adopting hierarchical worldviews, they prefer expert groups making the decisions. So they would be more likely to say, okay, this is outside of my area of expertise. I want someone who's an expert in this, who knows all the technical information that they need to know, to be making decisions for me. So that it's a bit more of that top-down hierarchical decision-making process. Egalitarians, on the other hand, come to this saying, well, I think all the information should be provided to everyone so that we can all make our own decisions in the marketplace. So to some extent or another, everyone wants to be involved in the decision-making process in different ways depending on the situation. But ultimately, I think the challenge is where people are willing to trust some processes of people more than others. So an example is, if you provide me with information about food labels, for instance, I actually think that people are okay with some, they're okay with some types of decisions, but not others. So questions about whether a food or some product should be on the market is really, from both an egalitarian and a hierarchical perspective, informed by the relevant stakeholders. So for the hierarchical people, it's the experts. For the egalitarian people, it's more the different people who are going to consume those products or choose not to. When we go into the type of decisions that are more ethical in nature, whether that thing should be on the market at all, I think that's where people really differ about what who should be making what decisions. So let me wrap up with just a couple of other nuggets of information that we've got from all of this research. I think that one of the themes underlying all these different findings is that it matters. The quality of information definitely matters. The way that it's translated or packaged definitely matters. And CGRAT does a fantastic job in really bridging that science or expert to layperson knowledge gap. But there's more than that, and it doesn't. You could continue to improve the communications and the content of that information more and more and more. But and there's other things going on here. One of the things that I think is really important that the mayor and Ryan hit on so clearly was that place is important. The reason being that we are connected to our place. Even if you're someone that's traveled around and moved around, there's still some kind of relationship that you have with the experience of the place that you are and the place that you feel you belong to. Sorry, I'm going to try and skip over a few things to make this a little quicker for Missy. One of the things about place, from air pollution research at least, is that visual experiences are very important. So when you see something like soot landing on your windowsill, or like the decontamination vessels, or actually you had some great photos, Ryan, about the nets that show that pollution from the oil, and you didn't even know, you couldn't say what was in there, but it was brown, it was beautiful, but it was foreign. So those kinds of experiences are very important, and it comes from that knowledge and deep connection with place. I think that's highly related to trust. People have talked about trust, and probably yesterday also a lot. So I'm going to skip over that one. But again, it's those experiential pieces of information that we are paying attention to. So we have the science on one hand. We have the experiences, whether they're visual or they're from emotional feelings of trusting someone. What on earth are we to do? From a psychological perspective, what we know is that people process information, no matter who you are, using two different systems. There's the analytic system, which that's the logic side, that's where we're very deliberative, we take time, we like to collect all the information that we can possibly look at in the context that we have. But we also have this experiential system, which is a much more rapid, sometimes intuitive or automatic process, and it's based on those experiences. And that's why when there's this lack of understanding between the scientists and regulators and lay people, it's because we're using different systems. But it doesn't mean that the other side is not using both systems at the same time. Ultimately, we need both types of information processing systems. If you think about, going back to all those decisions we make every day, if you have to cross a road and you would sit there and think, oh, okay, so the velocity of the oncoming vehicle is probably this. If I cross at this time, the impact and the consequences of the impact, you would never cross a road. You would get stuck in analysis paralysis. And that's why we have this experiential system. Everybody has it. It's actually an older system, psychologically speaking. And at the same time, we need the analysis. One of the unique things about being human is that, wow, look what we can do with the way that we have figured out different technologies and other scientific pursuits. To figure out how to move forward, what to pursue and what to avoid, we need both systems to interact. I took out some slides on narrative, but I think narrative is a really good way to try and integrate those systems, talking to people in this kind of venue, talking to people in town halls, having focus groups or community meetings where people can really bring to the table, I'm really worried about this. Why are you worried about that? Because I worry that my kids are going to get poisoned, or I worry that I'm not going to be able to pay my bills. Those kinds of issues can come up more freely in some contexts than in more lecture-style environments. So I think a diverse array of communication contexts are really important. So anyway, the Sea Grant Montgomery partnership we already gave a shout out to because I think they've been fabulous. Of course, there's a lot of academic research that's produced a lot of papers and reports. I think that local governments and non-government organizations have been terrific in participating in forums like this and many other research programs to help communicate that information and get more informed and help share. It could be about the claims process or it could be about the safety and seafood, but they've been terrific. I just wish there was more funding for those kinds of efforts. And then, of course, there's many different forums in which we put about the lessons learned. Just to wrap up and say public engagement is critical for all the reasons that everyone, real people like Ryan and the mayor talk about, community groups, the BPSOS and other terrific groups have shared. But I still think there are some unaddressed concerns. I think dispersants is one of them. And I think that the situation-specific information that evolves very rapidly during a spill, but even after the spill as populations change and science and knowledge changes, means that we have to be vigilant and continue to talk and share information. I think that we have this fantastic opportunity to be prepared better ahead of the next, it might be an oil spill, but it might be something else. A different technology comes along that we haven't even dreamed of yet. But getting people's attention without overburdening or burning them out is really a tricky balance. And then there's this great report by Anne Hayward-Walker that has a lot of recommendations also, which I can share with you if you are interested. I would say I've covered pretty much all of these things. I think if there was one thing from all of this information that I would really emphasize, it's the grounding our efforts in local context. And that means involving local people in all stages of preparing, responding, and recovering from a disaster. And then just because I'm a BP scientist, I think that the only way we can learn from our efforts is to really systematically evaluate and know whether and how things have worked, and when things haven't, retool and tailor our next efforts and try again, collect that information so that we know whether it's we're having an impact that we want. This is our consortium issue there. And thank you very much for your attention.